And welcome back to a fresh episode of Business Growth Show. I'm your host, Sam Dunning, co-owner over at webchoiceuk.com. And if you haven't done so yet, check out our weekly emails where I share actionable B2B marketing, website and SEO tips, podcasts, free giveaways, and more. You can give it a shot over at businessgrowth.email. So joining me today, I've got Shannon Curran. Shannon's the VP of Marketing over at MadKudu. Shannon, welcome to the show. How are we doing?
Good. Thank you so much. Happy Friday. Excited
Yeah. Likewise. Good to chat. Looking forward to the convo. We're going to be talking about how to make predictions in B2B marketing. I think this is going to be super useful for a bunch of kind of tech founders, marketers, maybe even some sales reps that tune in to understand how they can actually leverage predictions, leverage data to make sound decisions when it comes to driving leads, pipeline, revenue for their B2B organizations. So that said, why should B2B companies consider making predictions when it comes to their marketing?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic. It's something that every time I'm in conversation with my peers, the kind of elephant in the room conversation, the dirty word of attribution comes up. It is something that I think no one has solved. Everyone's still, it's wild to me how many CMOs still talk about it, in a lot of their job. And so the way that we think about it over at MadKudu is thinking a little bit less about what happened in the past and more about how you can use data to help you understand what's going to happen in the future, right? And I think that we have so much data now, right? I think this is something that every tech company is talking about, the oversaturation of data, especially if you're selling into revenue teams, right? So if you're thinking about marketers, there's just signals everywhere, tons of noise as the buying process gets more and more, I don't even know if it's necessarily complex. A lot of times it's complex, but it's just noisy. Like I think there's just so many channels. And how do you know which of those signals to prioritize to understand where your revenue and your pipeline is going to come from? So we think a lot about how we can be the co-pilot to revenue teams to allow them to understand where to invest their budget, where to invest their time, how do they predict and prioritize the right revenue generating signals so they know how to only work on the accounts that look like they're close won business.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it's a super timely topic because so many companies, so many brands, so many teams in the tech space especially getting really clamping down on the budgets, whether that's paid spend, influencer spend, I don't know, SEO spend, website spend, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So this is going to be super useful. And I want to jump through kind of your ideas when it comes to kind of putting together that kind of strategy. But how will making predictions impact revenue specifically? Is it around, like you mentioned there, just setting aside budget for the right channels that have the most impact kind of shorter term, or is there a bit more to consider?
Yeah, it's really a full funnel approach. So everything from where do I invest at the top of the funnel to know that the right quality leads are coming, or leads or accounts. I like to hope that folks are looking at accounts now, right? Are coming into their pipe or into their funnel. And then as they go through their funnel, really understanding the customer journey and where folks should prioritize. So it's interesting. I think a few years ago so I joined MadKudu about 8 months ago, but a few years ago, we are working a lot with specifically product-led growth companies that had a ton of volume in terms of signups, in terms of leads, and they needed help prioritizing, right? They needed help scoring them. They needed to understand, when is a lead actually ready to go to sales? And there was so much volume that was really our value, right? And now we're seeing these folks, inbound volume is down across the board. And you're also seeing there's a lack of investment. Sorry, I knew this was going to happen. This is my cat. There is less investment on the PLG front as well. Let me restart this. This is going to work. Oh no, it focused on him instead of me. I can help it guide me. And so we're able to help teams now really think about how do they predict in the future where to put their budget. and where to invest, and how do they tell their sales folks what accounts to go after? How do we actually make outbound work again? And that's what we're really seeing as a big value add, which is a little bit different than what we were seeing maybe 2 years ago.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, all makes sense. And I know you, before we hit recording, there's something you work on or mention or encourage companies to get stuck into called a hybrid funnel.
Yeah.
So it'd be great if you could share a bit more what that entails and how that can help organizations.
Definitely. I'm sorry about my camera. It's really just giving me a tough time here. Let's see if I can get it.
Yeah, no worries. We can always cut this out.
It might be a little blurry for you. So when you think about funnels, it used to be inbound, outbound, right? Like it was, you're either an inbound business, you bring a ton of traffic to your website, or you are mostly an outbound business, lots of cold calls, right? What we're seeing now is pretty much every company has a hybrid funnel. So everything from inbound to outbound to a product-led growth motion. So if they have a freemium or free trial offer, lots of folks are also building a ton of revenue in their customer base. So you're looking at land and expand. And all of those are coming in as different qualified leads. So you get to see like SQL, PQL, MQL, like you hear all of these acronyms, right? And what we're truly trying to say is that the QL part is the thing that matters, right? Like, is this qualified? Oh, I'm back. So is this traffic qualified? Are these accounts qualified? Are these contacts qualified to really send over to sales? So it really means a lot less about the channel in which they are brought in on, other than how you allocate your budget, which we think is really important. But in terms of your sales team, do you think an AE really cares where, the hand raiser came from? Certainly not.
Yep.
They care if it's going to close, right? And so, and how quickly, and if they can hit their number, right?
For
and
sure.
Sales folks are grinding right now. They are definitely, it's not the game that it has been, right? As if you're in B2B tech, right? Which I know a lot of your audience is, over the last few years has been really different, right? They're definitely searching everywhere they can to find business. And so we're finding now that it doesn't really matter which channels, from a marketing perspective, they're coming in from. They just want to know that they're coming. And so we're all running a hybrid funnel. We can't rely on one channel anymore. I was talking to a customer the other day that their entire business was pretty much built on paid ads.
Right.
Like, and they had enough volume, like that they were bringing in enough. And now they're finding like that is not scalable. We're running out of capital. And we need to diversify our funnel sources, right? So, yeah, we're all of us are in it. I think maybe some of the big giants aren't, but I think they are. So
it's funny how it always takes crises or issues like that for us to realize that a multi-channel marketing system just makes sense. And I've certainly been guilty of it in our own business, WebChoice, and various other companies. Like when something takes a severe hit, then it's like, oh yeah, we should probably have other channels running to drive inbound rather than just relying on paid or SEO or demand gen or influencer marketing or social or whatever it might be, or outbound cold calling, cold email, whatever. But it's always those times when you realize, and like you say, if you're running on paid, and like we're seeing that across the board quite a lot, that inbound from paid is kind of on a bit of a downhill slope. And it really brings in home that you can't rely on one or two channels to fuel your sales team.
And every business is totally different, right? That's the other thing, and I think everyone knew they should be diversifying a few years ago, but if one of your channels is massively taking off, how do you say, no, don't allocate budget like over there, because we want to try and grow these other like really nascent channels that are going to take a long time to, like organic is a good example, right? That takes a long time to show value. And organic is also, people are finding, I think we're hearing that it's down across the board because less people are in an active buying process than they used to be, right? Less people are searching for solutions. And so you need to be a lot more focused on getting your brand in front of your customers so that you become more persuasive in that buying process. So organic was amazing when people were constantly looking for software, right? When people were always searching for software, right? How do I solve my problem? How can I buy more tools? I remember I was in a role a few years ago that our MarTech stack had 56 tools in it. Wow. And that was like the golden age of MarTech, right? Where like everyone is buying a point solution for very small things, right? And now people are saying, how do I get my RevTech stack down to 5 tools? Like they're platforms that go across the teams. So I don't have, a marketing ops team that is just managing 1,000-point solutions, right? And how could I get my CAC down, right? In terms of software, so I don't have to do a layoff, right? So I think that I think people knew that this was the right thing to do, but it was it's easy to look back and say, how did we not diversify? It's like, well, if you had a ton of traffic coming in, it makes complete sense. Like that's a great signal that you should invest, right? So I think I don't blame anybody. I think it's just,
no.
Yeah, definitely we're in a new age, right? And I think that it's important that we adapt to it.
Yeah, for sure. I hate to think what the monthly spend was on about 58 MarTech tools a month.
I don't even know. I remember I canceled like most of them when I got them. I was like, I don't even know how to sign into half of these. I don't know. But a lot of them were also like $10 a month. Like this was the time when you had a lot of those like social media tools and like blog optimization tools. And I think they were all cheap enough that they probably didn't even get into a procurement process, right? So they just became a complete spatter of of stuff that had one person logged in, right? And I think I do think that age is kind of is ending for sure.
For sure. So when it comes to setting up a prediction and a prioritization system for your B2B company, whether it's tech or service-based, how can we do it? What are some of the first steps that we should consider before we start axing channels or moving a bunch of cash into another platform or channel or market? What's like the very first consideration?
Definitely. I think the biggest thing is looking at, I think this sounds very simple, but looking at your win-loss analysis and understanding really what business is closing, right? So what does your close one revenue actually look like?
Right.
And using that to work backwards through your funnel. And it's interesting though, because lots of folks that have an 18, 24-month sales process, that's really hard because, the channel, you can do the exact same investment that you did 24 months ago on a channel and it's fundamentally different, right? But really understanding the value of your product and what types of companies are truly buying your product and getting value. And then working backwards from there. So building out a scoring model, right, that looks like your best customers, that looks like your stickiest customers, and doing your best to scale that, and then working backwards back up the funnel, right? Saying how do we invest in channels that we know we're going to bring in these types of folks. The way we think about it is that you have accounts that there's kind of two different dimensions, right? They have the right firmographic data, which means that they are the great customer fit. So they are right in your ICP and your segmentation. They look exactly like your closed one revenue or where you want to go. That's okay too. Like if you have a really strong conviction that you can move up market or move into a new industry, run some tests and then build that into your models. And then there's this second dimension, which we call either likelihood to buy or engagement. So what have they done to show that they are in a place where they'd be a really great fit to go into a sales process? So that I think we all know this, right? If you push people into a sales process too early, you propose on the first date, it is a really bad experience. And I think we're all feeling like you don't have a million shots these days to come back on an account. Unless your point of contact is changing all the time, which that is happening a lot of places. But even in your customer base, you're reselling all the time, right? And so that's those are kind of that's the framework that we think about. Look at your close one revenue, build a scoring model based on that, and then build a really excellent feedback loop from your customer success, your sales team, and your marketing team, right? I think that's the most critical part, is that this is something that's constantly evolving. It's not a set it and forget it. And I think that's where a predictive model really does help. And using, the hot button term AI to really help automate the parts of this that are kind of jobs to be done, right? So that your team can focus on selling and focus on marketing.
Nice. So in terms of this win-loss analysis, just to break it down a bit more, is there like a time frame that we should do it over? I.e., should we do like the last year, 12 months? Should it be a bit more? Are there any kind of more detailed specifics that we should look into? As you touched on it there, were they ideal clients that we won? Because it could be that you won a ton of deals, but they were actually like really low average order value, and perhaps the customer churned after a couple months because they weren't a great fit and they didn't get the value that they thought they were going to get out of the offer.
Yeah, that's a great point. So lifetime value of your customer is really important, right? Understanding which customers get to stickiness. So I think that's where I think the collaboration between, that's why I like to call it a revenue technology support, because everything from the first marketing touch to the renewal to the adoption, right, is so critical to understand if a customer is successful. So looking at, I guess it depends on the time frame, depending on your business, right? So do you typically have like a 60-day sales cycle? Is your sales cycle a year? And then what is your typical onboarding cycle to get to stickiness, right? To get to that activation kind of moment. And so looking at those customers of it, I'm not a complete expert on this, but I think where I've seen this be successful is looking at a few different types of customers. So ones that you've had for a long time, and then consistently looking at win-loss, like on a weekly basis, so that you can, or weekly to monthly. Monthly is probably, depending on your sales cycle, is probably more useful, but really staying on top of if you're seeing some trends of, hey, it looks like these types of customers are just like all of their budgets are frozen. So we might need to move on, right? Or we're finding that our value prop gets us in the door, but like once we get kind of deep, it seems like we don't think we're going to get sticky here, depending on based on our onboarding process and what we know it takes. So working in collaboration with sales and CS to really define what your most successful customer looks like, and then consistently doing win-loss in terms of closing business.
Gotcha. What do you folks recommend in terms of the attribution mirage? So when it's always tough in B2B, right, to actually nail down which channel was the one that brought in the demo request or the client consultation request, because quite often it's a mix and match of several, right?
It always is. And, there's been lots of talk about the dark funnel over the last, few years, about the fact that a majority of the buying process, what is it, over 75%, happens before you even know who the customer is. And especially if you're selling to an executive audience, they're buying from their peers, right? Like they're asking their peers in communities. They are trying to understand who their competitors are using. They're trying to, so very little of it has to do with your blog post that you've optimized for the right keyword, right? So I think that doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing those things. I think it really matters for you to make sure that you're in all of the channels that your buyers could be potentially researching and understanding, but it is really hard to understand. So the way that I think about attribution is I don't.
Easy.
Easy. I know it's easy for me to say. I also work in an earlier stage company, and so I think it's a little easier for me to say. But I think what we find is really critical is if you have a really great model to understand who you sell to and who closes. How do you understand the quality of the leads or the accounts that are coming in through certain channels? So that when you run webinars, you can see based on your analytics that the quality of those leads is really high, but none of them convert. Like literally none.
Right.
So that's just an example. It's possible. Maybe you have an excellent webinar program. It's possible. But you can see also that a majority of our traffic is direct, like almost all of it. Direct or organic, right? And so we see that it's a mix. It's a mix of different tactics that are driving folks in. So we are looking at our funnel analytics to understand what are kind of those last touch, like how do people finally convert, what pushes them over the line. But that is not where you invest all your money, right? Because there's so much that happens before that. And so how do you balance your budget to really understand that kind of air cover approach, while also making sure that you're saturated in the right channels where they finally do the behavior change of the demo request, right? So I think it's just two different strategies, and I think there's a lot of value in measuring your team also on engagement in a target account list. So like say you have a target account list, unless you're a super horizontal solution where your target account list is like the whole world, like Slack or Monday.com or something like that. But for us, our target account list is pretty clear. We know who we sell to best. We'll let in other folks if they'd love to buy, but we know who we sell to best. So how do we increase engagement with that list, bringing them to our website, driving some excitement for them, so that when they're ready to purchase, that we're already top of mind. So it's a very kind of high level approach to attribution. I'd rather my marketers spend less time justifying their existence and more time doing marketing.
Yeah, I get the point. If push comes to shove, though, this is a bit of a tricky one.
Yep.
And let's say you had to cut a channel. and maybe you're spending like a few grand on LinkedIn ads, Google paid search, maybe review sites like G2 or Capterra, maybe you had an organic SEO team producing content, building links, maybe one or two other channels, maybe you're doing some podcast ads, whatever. How would you then go about, like, you had to cut budget by 10K a month. How would you then go about thinking, well, I don't actually know what channel is all these channels combined are bringing customers to us, as well as, of course, communities and dark social and our prospects talking to each other and things that channels that can't be tracked. But how would a company go about like cutting one of those? Is it just a case of interviewing prospects and kind of getting the insights from them, talking to your sales team, using those signals, then making a sound decision? Or is there a bit more to it, in your opinion?
I think those are critical. But I also think you can see when, like, there's a good example of, like, if your paid social traffic dips and your demo requests are also dipping, like, you can probably see that paid social was contributing a lot to your demo requests, right? So that is it's just looking at leading indicators instead of only looking at like one piece of the puzzle, right? So I think there's a way to understand, if you've been investing heavily in organic and your organic traffic is not increasing and you're not seeing an increase in folks coming in from organic with a high intent, it makes sense to cut that channel, right? And I think we're being really discerning right now. And I think the way that I've had my team think about this is like, how do we get to MVP on every channel with enough leading indicators to know which ones to invest in? Right. So what is that first leading indicator that we know investment equal, like we can continue to invest? So like we've actually seen this with paid social over the last little bit. It's actually working for us. So I'm like, all right, up the investment. In terms of organic, we're just starting to kind of restart our organic strategy to get it off the ground. And I know if we see like a 10 to 15% increase month over month with an investment of X dollars, and our demos equal X dollars, that to me means let's continue to invest. You just need to break it down to looking at leading indicators instead of, I think a lot of folks just dumped a ton of money and started every channel over the last few years. So I think bringing it back down to basics of what is this channel actually supposed to achieve? What are the metrics that actually show me it's working? And if it's not, if I pull back, what happens? Like, what do you start to see happen? And how will we know really quickly if that's a really good investment or not? So you can always reverse it, which is the thing I think people forget about budgets is you take money out, you can always put it back in, right? Like that's not, we're not printing, well, most of us are not printing billboards, right? So it's pretty easy to take it down.
I like it. Yeah, I like it. I think experimentation is like a skill that every marketer should possess. And the ability to get creative, get scrappy, whether that is kind of starting a channel yourself. Maybe you build out the podcast internally because you don't have cash to invest in a production company anymore. Or like you say, maybe you think, I'm going to turn this channel off for a couple of months, see if it really impacts demo requests or close one revenue. If it doesn't, great, let's move it elsewhere. And just, taking those things into your own hand is smart. Of course, it's a lot easier when you're a smaller business.
Yes.
And you don't have a ton of red tape to get through.
Yes.
It can be more difficult for larger organizations with those kind of things.
Totally. And I think that's where technology can really support you more in a larger business, right? Like you should have a more sophisticated, analytics platform. Like we see a lot of companies that have a big volume are using MadKudu to be able to define this. They know if they're MQL, like it's truly amazing to see how many companies are still gold on MQLs and not quality pipeline. And so we're showing folks in a lot of places, about 20% of your MQLs are about 80 to 90% of your revenue. So how can you decrease the volume of MQLs and have your pipeline actually go up because you're investing in the right channels? So it really does help. Like it's not something you can really do on your own because of the just vast amounts of data. We do see a lot of value in using a predictive platform or what we call a revenue automation intelligence platform to really be able to tell you what can you automate, where's the intelligence, like how can you not spend 1 million hours with the data team looking at this stuff and just have your models kind of work for you.
Do you guys have any data on, you mentioned like MQLs there and like people over investing in MQLs and them not actually going into close one deals.
Yep.
Do you have any data on like the biggest failed channel that companies in B2B tech are still investing in that's producing a ton of MQLs, just not producing end one deals?
That's a really interesting data
I'd love
point.
to
We
see
should
that.
look into it. Yeah, that's a good content piece that we can have coming up. I think
Maybe we'll do
it's
a case study.
I'm not sure it's the same across the board. But it would be interesting to look at. But we are certainly seeing, I think a lot of teams want to move away from the MQL. Like it's not like all of these conversations are almost everyone I talk to wants their whole team gold on revenue, which I get, right? Marketers want to show that they're driving revenue. CMOs and VPs are accountable for close one revenue. And so they want to be able to show that they're high, like their high intent, MQLs are actually converting. But I think it depends on it depends on the business to know which channels are actually driving it.
I actually really want to do a case study on that now. I think that could be an awesome episode. Perhaps we could do a collab in the future. Okay,
yeah, totally.
Cool. Awesome. So we went off on a bit of tangent. I think we jumped ahead quite a way as well. So which I always do on this show. But yeah, so we're talking about kind of win-loss analysis, kind of analyzing data, making sure the leads are coming in at good fit, and they're the right kind of clients that you're closing deals with. Is there a next step or other things that we should be doing in order to be able to make sound predictions on what our business should be investing in or prioritizing moving forward after we've done that part?
Yeah, I think I think I brought this up earlier, but I think that feedback loop is super critical, right?
Right.
I think I made a mention of, there is no set it and forget it, right? This market is constantly changing. Your business is constantly changing. And to be able to, a big part of this is building trust, and alignment, another like word that comes up all the time, between sales and marketing specifically, right? So how many times have you heard sales teams being like, we're not meeting our number because we're getting garbage from the marketing team, right? Like, I don't know why they're sending us these leads that are like just people that downloaded ebooks or like that attended an event, but they didn't even see us. Like, they don't even know who we are. Like, this is pretty much cold outreach, right? And you hear marketers saying, well, the problem is they're not properly working the leads that we're sending over. I'm looking and I'm seeing the SLAs are being broken, like people aren't being followed up with, so there's a lot of this like tension between these two teams specifically, never mind CS, which is just like, hey, can you help me? They're on the other side of like, hey, marketing, like we could use your help. And so I think there's a ton of value in creating shared definitions, shared truth between teams around these are the quality that we are sending over to you that is either designated as very good or good is based on the revenue you've closed, sales team. Like, I promise you. And we also are making our, like, at least for us, we're making our analytics even more and more transparent. So if they're like, this lead looks like trash, why is it scored like this? They go right into our platform, search their email address, or actually they can go right into Salesforce, search their email address, and it shows them exactly why they're scored that way. And so they can understand. And it's like, we're no longer fighting over subjectivity. We're looking at objectively, this is what our model is telling us. This is where our business has been successful. If we think otherwise and we want to do a manual override, which is possible too, we're going to do that together, right? Like, that is something we're going to make a decision on together, because this impacts both our scoring in terms of the marketing, as well as what sales is getting, as well as what are the leading indicators of a need for expansion in CS or a churn risk, or something like that. So I think the next step is really a continuous feedback loop. And I think that that's what I found really valuable as a marketer, that in working with a sales leader, is that we win together and we lose together. Right? Like, if marketing is winning and the business is losing, something is very broken. And we see it a lot where like, there's almost nothing like kind of ickier to me than the idea of coming to like a all team meeting or a board meeting and marketing being like, we're crushing it. Like, our goals are like, we're passing all our goals. And then you look at and you're like 50% of your revenue close. And it's like, what's broken there? Because in theory, if your models are right, like if marketing's crushing their goals, so should sales, right? If your sales cycle is like 2 years long, maybe not. But I think there's certainly should be a correlation of both those teams being successful together.
You would hope so.
You would think so, right? And it just makes for such a better experience, right? Like, I hear all the time. How do you build sales and marketing alignment? Like, just be friends, know them, like get along with them personally. It's like, well, why don't you just be playing the same game? Like, have the same coach, right? Be on the same field. Like, in some places, like, you're like fundamentally playing different sports, right? And so I think there's a lot of value in that shared language, shared responsibility, and of course, liking each other is excellent as well. But I think that's secondary.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think marketing should actually be forced to call their own leads, like at least once a quarter, and just test the quality themselves before, because I know so many marketers that would never hop on a CS call, let alone make a cold prospecting call or call a warm lead or anything like that. So they should really, like, yeah, a lot of marketers are encouraged to listen to gong calls, but I think hands-on experience is like a game changer.
And it is interesting because I do feel like marketing has gotten more and more specialized over the last 5 years or so, because marketing teams have gotten really big in a lot of organizations. And so marketers have gotten further and further away. It's been a disservice to the marketers as well, right? They've gotten further and further away from the customer, like from the sales process. I know I've been interviewing folks over the last few months for content jobs, and so many of them have no idea how their work has impacted revenue because their team was so big,
Right.
and they were just accounted for. All they had to do was produce. Like, they just had to produce, make sure traffic was coming in, make sure they're ranking for the right search terms, right? And so I don't blame a lot of marketers who have been kind of coming up over the last 5 to 7 years for being distant, because what made them successful was being excellent craftsmen at whatever channel they were kind of assigned to, right? And I think you're finding now that there's this big conversation around like scrappy generalists and how they're actually being more successful in this current market, because they understand the value of the business and they can pivot where their channel kind of strategy is. We were talking earlier about how cutting channels. Well, some people that have, anyone in there like that grew up in tech and now is in like, whatever, their late 20s, early 30s, or they made a career shift. So they're like older, but they've been in tech for the last 8 years. A lot of them are specialists in a channel.
Yep.
So you're thinking about like cutting channels and you're cutting their job, like everything they've built. Right. And so I think there's definitely a lot of conversation around marketers get on the phone, like BDRs and SDRs have the hardest job. Like, try getting right in front of a prospect and actually doing like talking the talk, but they haven't been really educated or served to do that. And I think it's been a really tough transition for a lot of them, that were on like 12-person content teams or like 15-person demand teams. And all they managed was like, I don't know, Google Search Console, like that's like a real thing.
Sounds like a cushy job.
Yeah, well, yeah, but also like it was a hard skill, like they learned a tool. A lot of them also are just managing platforms over the last few years. And so as platforms are consolidating, so are their jobs. And so I think I have a lot of empathy for folks that have built their careers over the last, 5-7 years of hyper growth in tech and are now like, whoa, like I need a broader understanding of the business. Like, I didn't have the purview or like the visibility into so many parts of the business that would have helped me a lot in my job. And so I definitely agree they should hop on the phone, but I think that there's definitely some nuance into why that would be so challenging for them.
I appreciate the pushback. I think you're right. Like, especially take roles in marketing, like field marketers and things like that, where almost roles have been completely wiped out that were full force a couple of years ago. And then everyone's saying, let's cut events, let's move everything digital. And like you say, if you're not a bit of a marketing all-round, if you're going for a job role that's outside of a field marketing and you're going against someone who's more of an all-round marketer who says, look, I've got experience in X, Y, Z, I can run a podcast, I can run some SEO, I can run some paid search, I can set you up on here. I've also got experience in this. Well, who's going to get prioritized, the specialist or the generalist that's actually going to come in and probably impact revenue quite quickly?
And it's so interesting because probably about 7 or 8 years ago, it was the exact opposite. It was like, I was definitely more of a generalist. I was not working in tech yet. I was considering going to business school, which I did end up doing. And people thought I was so ridiculous for doing that. They were like, why would you do that? Like, that's not going to serve you. Just go work in tech and you'll learn it. And everyone was telling me to specialize. they were like, you're too general. It's hard to know what to hire you for. And I did specialize early in my career. And so I started working in PR, and then I moved into a content strategy role, went to business school part-time. So I was working this whole time, and it has served me immensely. This is not like back to the prediction conversation, not because I knew how to predict that this is where anything would go, but I was a content marketer that was able to understand the impact on the business because I could speak finance. I could speak all these other languages that like I was not going to learn in my, 800 person company that I was working in with, a team of 45 marketers. Like I got some kind of visibility to it, but the full picture I was not certainly going to have an understanding of. Right. And so I think there's definitely, it's crazy that it has swapped. And so I have a lot of empathy for folks that are like, I was told to specialize over the last, 6 to 7 years. And now I'm working on becoming more general. Yeah, it's like if you're a content person now, you need to be totally multi-channel. Like you need to have touched every channel. If you're a long form writer, like that was a job where like I've talked to companies that had a full team of only long form writers. And that is pretty uncommon now in terms of, especially with AI, that's like a whole nother conversation, but I think it's a lot is changing for them. So yeah. I think there's in terms of being able to equip your teams properly, I think this is even more important than ever as your teams are trying to upskill in lots of different ways.
Yeah, really, really sound advice. That business sense and knowing what kind of your CEO, what your company owners, what your company founders truly care about, and is really, really useful. Just so you can understand general business. Then, if you do decide you want to have a side gig in the future, or you want to start your own thing, those skills are invaluable. That's why kind of getting your hands dirty in a small startup or a smaller business is really useful. In your case, kind of getting that business expertise is super, super valuable, no doubt. And to your second point, I think it's a tough time for copywriters right now with the introduction of all these AI tools. So unless you're super specialized or niched or got a good client base, it must be extremely difficult to generate new business, I would have thought.
Yeah, I think it is it's tough. I don't believe that AI is going to completely, negate writers. I think there's a lot of value for really differentiated, thought-provoking content that is not AI driven, because everyone is just going to use AI to build their kind of like baseline content, right? Like you're not going to have content marketers writing, SEO focused pillar pages on topics anymore, because like to be fair, Bing writer, ChatGPT does it better. Like they can do the research faster. They can get you at least 80% of the way there. I'm seeing a lot of folks really using their skills as editors a lot more, or as prompt creation, and also thinking more multi-channel, right? So how can we think more about distribution strategy, more about the places that we are? How is our opinion actually really differentiated? What is our different perspective? That's something that I don't think AI is at yet. So I do think it's really critical. I have a soft spot in my heart for folks that come up through content. So I think there is definitely a huge place for them. It just is definitely a shift in like what their day-to-day looks like. If you're a freelance copywriter, I think generally it's going to be really hard. But some industries are super averse to AI, and I think they will continue to use. You see some of the large companies like banning it because they're afraid of having proprietary data putting into the engines, right? So you're seeing some folks are still certainly busy in some industries, but I think we're a little bit skewed in B2B tech because we're all hungry for the innovation for sure.
No doubt. Let's wrap up the prediction process strategy that we're running through in terms of, so you mentioned feedback loops. How often should we be doing reviews when it comes to things like the channels we're investing in, churn rates, general bits and pieces when it comes to our marketing strategy, outlay, and teams? Like how often should we be reviewing that feedback loop and then kind of be reassessing our strategy?
Yeah, the way that we think about it is we do it on like a holistic monthly basis. So I think this also is a tip for anyone that has quarterly board meetings. Please have your team do monthly reviews, because that quarterly review is so much easier. when you are doing it monthly, which all I do is just comprise all 3 months together, and it has a story that we can tell over that time. And so we're looking at every channel in terms of like a holistic view on a month-to-month basis. But we are really running very specific experiments for certain, and this is something that actually our CEO is really excellent at, and I'm even upskilling in like how specific he gets in terms of experiments that we're running on a week-to-week basis. So we work in kind of an agile sprint kind of esque marketing approach. And so we are looking at what are we trying to prove each week with the work that we're doing. And so we can move really fast. So we're pretty early stage. So I would say that that's a little easier for us, but I would challenge companies that are even larger to say, what are you trying to prove? What are the hypotheses you're trying to prove week over week as your channel strategy is changing a lot? And how are you able to prove those so that when you get to the end of the month, it's not like we hadn't looked at anything all month and now we're surprised. We also look at our our key metrics every single week because we're keeping a close eye on them. So
nice. So in short, review every month if you can.
Yes, that is in short, yeah, every month if you can, and then keeping your team with their leading indicators. So each one of my team members have their own leading indicators. They should be operating week to week, I think. At least that's what's worked for me and my team.
Awesome. Shannon, really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for sharing your tips, hand-on advice, and really enjoyed the discussion. So with that, please do share more about how everyone tuning in can learn more about yourself, MadKudu, and any way you want to send the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can visit us at madkudu.com, where you can learn more about how your revenue teams can continue to automate the intelligence that they have to be able to predict and prioritize only revenue generating signals, which I think is something that's becoming even more and more important. And I guess you can find me on LinkedIn. My name is Shannon Curran. I usually write a lot about how challenging it is to be a leader and also the things that I'm learning all the time about how to be kind of a better coach, a better leader, and all the things I'm learning from all of the other kind of revenue leaders that I get to talk to on a day-to-day basis, which is awesome. So yeah, that's where you can find us. And I look forward to, chatting with anyone after this.
Good stuff. And we'll put all of those links in the show notes at businessgrowth.marketing. And with that, I want to thank you once again, Shannon. Really enjoyed the chat.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
No worries. And as always, if you enjoyed today's episode, a quick rating or review on your podcast channel is appreciated. Or if you're on YouTube, a subscribe goes a long way. And with that, we'll catch you on the next one for more no BS B2B marketing tips and advice. Catch you soon.